This is selected passages from Apologia of Apuleius. Now, just to give you a little background, Apuleius was born in 124 AD. He died in 170 AD. He was about 45, 46 years old. He is the same author of Metamorphoses, also known as Golden Ass, in which a character named Lucius is turning into a golden ass, and he gets saved by the goddess Isis. So this is his later work, known as Apologia. He's on trial for the use of illegal magic, and he talks about how he's been initiated in all the rites of Lucius, of Isis, of Adonis, all the Roman mysteries, how he practices different voodoos and magic incantations. This is a guy who's into this stuff. He's into the lore. He is the Gnostic informant of the 2nd century. This guy is into this shit, man. Very interesting, fascinating character. And so the Apologia, taking place in the year 158. So he's on trial, like I said, and he's defending himself against his charges of illegal magic. So the text is divided up into 3 sections. What you're going to see in this video is me skimming through and reading the most interesting parts. But I did it in a way where it will actually be coherent and it'll make sense. You're not going to miss any of the important parts. So you'll see him opening up a statement, giving his reasons on his defenses, and then closing it. So it's not the entire text. You have to go online and find it. But it's enough here where you will understand exactly what's happening. And I hope you guys will enjoy this. Thank you. Why dost thou gaze upon the sky? Oh, that I wear spangled sphere, and every star should be an eye, to wander o'er thy beauties here. In life thou wert my morning star, and now that death hath stolen thy light, alas, thou shinest dim and far, like the pale beam that weeps at night. Here also the lines addressed by the same writer, Plato, to the boys Alexis and Phaedrus, where he addresses them in joint poem. Although I nothing said but this, how fair Alexis is, all turn and gaze on thee. My soul, why show to dogs a bone and then torment them? Did we not lose Phaedrus thus? And again, not to quote any more lines than these, I will just repeat his last distich on Dion of Syracuse, and then make an end. Thou sleepest in my honor, on the country's breast. Dion, my beloved of ecstatic soul. But really, am I not acting absurdly to even mention these things in court? And are you not rather acting the part of calumniators, even to produce these matters as the grounds of your accusation against me? But I will forbear to enlarge upon those deep and holy mysteries of the Platonic philosophy, which, while they are revealed to but a few of the pious, are totally unknown to all the profane. How that Venus is a twofold goddess, each of the pair producing a peculiar passion, and in different kinds of lovers, one of them, the vulgar, who is prompted by the ordinary passion of love to stimulate not only human feelings, but even those of cattle and wild beasts to lust, and to commit enslaved bodies of beings thus smitten by her to immoderate the furious embraces. The other is the heavenly Venus, who presides over the purest love, who cares for men alone, but few of them, and who influences her devotees by no stimulants or allurements to base desire. For the love that is engendered by her is not wanton or lascivious love, but on the contrary, it is serious and unadorned, and allures its votaries to virtue by its own intrinsic beauty. And if at any time she does commend a graceful form, she scrupulously protects it against all cause for reproach. Nor indeed is there anything else in the beauty of a person deserving of love, beyond the fact that it recalls the mind which took its origin in deity, the beauty which in all truth and purity at once beheld among the gods. Hence, it is Afrianus with the usual eloquence was left with this line, where wise men love, all others will desire. If, then, the possession of a thing is no proof of the use of it, or the non-possession of the non-use of it, if not so much the possession of a looking glass is censored by you, as that looking into it, it then necessarily follows that you must show when in whose presence I looked into the glass. For according to the present state of the case, you make it a greater offense for a philosopher to look into a looking glass than for one of the uninitiated to pry into the mysteries of Ceres. Come new, even if I should confess that I have looked into it, pray what crime is it to be acquainted with one's own features, and to have their image not put up in one fixed spot, but to carry it about in a little mirror, ready to be surveyed wherever you please? Are you ignorant that there is nothing more deserving to he viewed by a man than his own features? Else what is the use of the statues and images thus framed with the varied resources of art? For in the mirror is to be seen the image wonderfully reflected, not only with the resemblance traced out, but endowed too with the motion and obedient to every gesture of a person whom it represents. But on the other hand, the resemblance that is molded from clay, formed of molten brass, hewn out of stone and pressed by the heat on wax, laid on a surface with paint, or represented by another resource of human art, after no long interval of time becomes quite unlike the original. And besides, it always preserves the same rigid, unmoved features just like a corpse. If there were now sitting as judges at this trial Fabricius, Gnaeus Scipio, Manius Curius, whose daughters, by reason of their poverty, went home to their husbands portion at the public expense, carrying with them the glories of their family and the money of the public, in Publicola, the expeller of the kings, and Agrippa, the reconciler of the people, the expense of whose funerals was, in consequence of their limited fortunes, defrayed by the Roman people by contributions of the smallest coins. If Attalus Regulus, whose little field was, in consequence of like poverty, cultivated at the public expense, if, in fine, all those ancient families, ennobled by consulships, censorships, triumphs, could obtain a short respite and return to light and take part in this trial, would you have dared to reproach a philosopher for his poverty in the presence of so many consuls distinguished for theirs? For my part, I have learned that in this especially the gods surpass mankind, that they have to satisfy no necessities. Hence it is that him among us who has the fewest possible necessities I consider most strongly to resemble a god. I was very well pleased, therefore, when you said, intending it as a reproach, that my property consisted of a staff and a wallet, and I only wished that I had such a perfect control over my mind that I required nothing whatever beyond those articles, and becoming submitted to the same equipment which Crates, throwing all riches aside, spontaneously desired. The purpose those lines of Homer, in which he celebrates the Isle of Crete, I will mention the words which he commences, that you may not suppose I have only invented for this purpose my defense. Scrip is a city's name, which mid dense smoke lies fair and flourishing. And then follow lines so admirable. If you were to read them, you would be much more inclined to envy me, my wallet, than the hand of Pudentilla. Do you censor philosophers for their scrip and staff? By the same reasoning, you ought to censor horsemen for their trappings, foot soldiers, and for their bucklers, standard bearers, and their ensigns, and those, in fine, who enjoy a triumph for their white steeds and their robes embroidered with sprigs of palm. These, however, are not the equipments of the Platonic sect, but they are the insignia of the class of cynics. Still, the scrip and the staff were the same to Diogenes and Antisthenes as the diadem to kings, the martial cloak to generals, the rounded hat to priests, and the crooked staff to augurs. Indeed, Diogenes the cynic, when disputing Alexander the Great as to who was the true king, boasted of his staff as serving him instead of a scepter. Even the invincible Hercules himself, you will, no doubt, feel a perfect contempt for those others as set of mendicants. Hercules himself, I say, the traveler over the whole earth, the cleanser thereof from wild beasts, the subduer of nations, when he was traveling through the earth. And shortly before he was summoned to heaven for his virtues, he had no better clothing than a single hide, although he was a god, and no other attendants than a single staff. For if, as I have read in my authors, a magician means, in the language of the Persians, the same thing the word priest does in ours, what is the crime, pray? In being a magician? What is the crime in properly knowing and understanding and being versed in the laws of ceremonials, the solemn order of sacred rites, religious ordinances? What if, indeed, that is, magic, which Plato calls the service of the gods, which he relates in what careful training the Persians bring up, a youth who is destined for the throne. I recollect the very words of that divine man, and do you, Maximus, recall them to your memory with me. When he is 14 years of age, those persons take charge of the boy, whom they call the royal tutors. These are 4 persons whom they select from the highest classes of the Persians, and who are approved of their age. One of these is the most wise, another the most just, another the most prudent, and the 4th is the most valiant man. Of these, one instructs him in the magic of Zoroaster and Ahura Mazda, which is the service of the gods. He also teaches him the art in governing. Do you not hear them? You who are so rash to accuse me of it, that magic is an art acceptable to the gods, one that most correctly teaches us how to worship and venerate them, one that is consequently consistent with piety and skilled in divine matters, one that has been ennobled from the very times of Zoroaster himself, prophet of Ahura Mazda, its inventors, as being the handmaid of the inhabitants of heaven. For among very rudiments of the royal training, this art taught, nor is any one of the Persians rashly allowed to be a magician, any more than he is to be king. The same Plato, in another discourse of his, speaking of Zalmoxis, a Thracian by birth, a man skilled in the same art as Zoroaster, has left a passage in his writings to the following effect. But he said, O happy man, that the soul is healed by certain incantations, and that these incantations are soothing words. And if this fact, what reason is there why I should not be allowed to understand either the soothing words of Zalmoxis or the priestly duties enjoined by Zoroaster? But if the common usage these people imagine that a magician is properly a person who, from communication and discourse with the immortal gods, is able, by a certain incredible power, centered in his incantations to do everything he pleases, then I greatly wonder why they have not been afraid to accuse me when they admit that I am possessed by such mighty powers. For you cannot take precautions against a power that is of nature so mysterious and so divine, in the same way that other influences may be guarded against. He who summons an assassin before the judge comes there attended by others. He who accuses a poisoner uses every precaution in taking his food. He who charges a man with theft keeps over his property. But here, on the other hand, he who puts a magician, such as they speak of, on trial of his life, by means of what attendants, what precautions, what guards, he is to ward off a destruction that is unforeseen, inevitable, most assuredly by none. Hence, a charge of this kind is not likely to be preferred by one who believes in its truth. But these accusations, by a kind of error, universally prevalent among the ignorant, are generally made against philosophers thus. For instance, such of them as make inquiry into the pure and primary causes of matter, they look upon as irreligious, and on that account assert that they deny the existence of gods, such as Anaxagoras, Lucius, Democritus, Epicurus, and other advocates of naturalism. Others, again, who are more than ordinary curiosity, inquire into the governance of the world, and with the greatest earnestness venerate the gods to these, to do vulgar give name the magicians, supposing that they know how to bring about those operations which they know to take place. For instance, were in the former days Epimenides, Orpheus, Pythagoras, and Osthenes, in like manner the purifications of Empedocles, the daemon of Socrates, and the abstract good of Plato, become similar objects of suspicion. Consequently, I congratulate myself when I myself added to this long list of great men. Still, I am afraid that frivolous, silly, and trifling things that they alleged against me of supporting their charge you will consider to make against me, if only on the ground that they have been so alleged. Why, she said, have you been inquiring after certain kinds of fishes, just as though a philosopher were not at liberty to do that? In the cause of knowledge, there is no suspicion whatever existing, either in consequence of the fact that fishermen, being induced for a sum of money to do that which they are in the general habit of doing, catching fish, they have taken care, however, to summon none of these fishermen as witnesses, for the best of reasons, because none such they were, nor yet the fact that a price being given for a marketable commodity, the amount of which price, however, they have taken care not to state, for fear lest, if they named a moderate price, their story might not have met with contempt. I might not have been believed, if on these points, I say, no ground for suspicion exists. You endeavored to procure some fish, says he. I do not wish to deny that fact, but tell me, I beg of you, is he who endeavors to procure some fish a magician? For my part, I don't think he is a bit the more so that if he were in search of hares or boars or fowl. Or is that fishes alone are in possession of certain properties that are hidden from other people but known to the magicians? What is it about fish that matters more? If you know what this property is, then it is clear that you yourself are a magician. But if you don't know why fish are more special, then you must, of necessity, confess that you are accusing a person of a thing which you know nothing whatever. Had you been a reader of Virgil, you certainly would have known that other things are usually sought for such purposes. For so far as I recollect, that the poet enumerates fillets of soft wool, male frankincense, threads of various colors, besides crackling laurel, clay that hardens and wax that liquefies, as well as some other things, which he has described in more serious work. She sprinkles round, with fiend Avernin, drops with that hallowed ground, coals hoary simples found by Phoebus' light, with brazen sickles reaped at noon of night, then mixes baleful juices in a bowl, and cuts the forehead of a newborn foal, robbing the mother's love. But you, libeller of the fishes, attribute far different appliances to magicians, substances not to be torn off from tender foreheads, but to be cut away from scaly backs, not to be dug up from the ground, but to be drawn from the sea, not to be cropped with the sickle, but to be hooked with the fisher's barb. In fine, for the purpose of incantations, he makes mention of poisons, you of dainties, he of herbs and suckers, you of scales and bones. He calls from the meadow, you ransack the deep. I could also have quoted to you a similar passage from Theocritus, others again from Homer, and a great number from Orpheus. I could have repeated a multitude of lines from the Greek comedies and tragedies, as well as the historians, had I not already observed that you were unable to read the letter of Pudentilla because it was written in Greek. Therefore, I will dip into one more Latin poet. Here are the lines which those will easily recognize who have read Laevius. Look for your antidote on every side. They snatch up charms of all sorts, whirling rhymes of magic potency, wingtails, threads of varied colors, and entwined with roots and herbs and suckers. From the neighing colt torn is the stimulant of fierce desire. These drugs, I will state to you my reasons for thinking so. Many have supposed that Pythagoras was a follower of Zoroaster, and was like him skilled in magic, and have informed us in their writings that when in the vicinity of Metapontum, on the shores of his own part of Italy, which he made a kind of second Greece, he saw a scion drawn up from a fisherman, whereupon he purchased the chances of the hall, and that after he had paid the money, he immediately gave orders that the fish which had been caught should be released from the nets and returned to the deep. Now I suppose he would not have let them go out of his own hands if he had found in them anything useful of magical purposes. For this man, so well versed in learning, and so close an imitator of the ancients, remembered full well that Homer, a poet gifted with universal knowledge, had in his writings attributed all the power of drugs to the earth, and not to the sea. For when speaking of certain enchantress, he writes thus: these drugs, so friendly to the joys of life, bright Helen, learned from the throne's imperial's wife, who swayed scepter, where the prolific Nile, with various simples clothes of fattened soil, with wholesome herbage mixed with direful bane, a vegetable venom taints the plain. Hence, just as Mercury, the conveyor of incantations, Venus, the charmer of the soul, Luna, the looker-on in the night, and Trivia, the mistress of the shades, used the summoned to the ceremonies of the magicians, so according to your account, henceforth Neptune, in company with Salacia and Portimus, and the whole throng of Nereids, will have been transformed from the surging agitations of the waves to the agitations of the passionate desire. What other ground then is there? Why are you mute? Why do you not speak? What is fierce commencement of your charge, drawn up in the name of my stepson? Him, my lord Maximus, I have determined to accuse before you. To each of your innumerable charges, I answer in a couple of words. You clean your teeth? Pardon my cleanliness. You look in a mirror? A philosopher ought. You compose verses? 'Tis not unlawful to do so. You examine fishes? Aristotle teaches me. You make gods of wood? Plato advises it. You marry a wife? The law enjoins it. She is older than you. No uncommon thing. You have sought to advantage yourself. Take up the deed of settlement. Recollect the gifts you have received, read over her will. If I have abundantly rebutted all these charges, if I have refuted all these calamities, if I admit not only all the accusations, but even all the aspersions uttered against me by these persons, I have kept philosophy aloof from censure, if I have in no way blemished the honor of philosophy, which is dearer to me than my own well-being, nay, rather, if I have kept it most carefully shielded on every side, if, in each of these respects, what I say is found to be the truth, then I may more securely afford to respect your good opinion than to dread your power, seeing I deem it less grievous and less to be dreaded by me, to be condemned by a proconsul, than to incur the censure of a man so good and so virtuous as yourself. And these were selected passages from the Apology of Apuleius. Wonderful text, greatly written. And what do you guys think? Leave a comment. What do you guys think about that text? Him referencing Zoroaster and Plato, Pythagoras, Orpheus as basically common mages as himself. Fascinating text. I wonder what you guys think. Leave a comment in the text.